shaping the future of player protection and potential post-advertising ban in Northern Europe.
Good morning. Thank you to our panelists for joining. We have, starting from the left-hand side, David Yatom. David is the General Counsel at Soft2Bet. He spent several years as General Counsel of SBTech and then moved to be a legal director with DraftKings when DraftKings and SBTech merged. He's got a lot of experience in the industry looking at it from the inside. And he also has experience in private practice with Firon before that. To David's right, we have Justin Franssen, who, to those of you who have anything to do with the Dutch market, is a known quantity because he leads arguably the leading gaming and gambling advisory team in the Netherlands at Kalff, Katz, Franssen. And to my immediate left, we have Simon Planzer. Simon is the founding partner at Planzer Law. He has a PhD from the University of St. Gallen, where he's also a lecturer. Simon actually leads a center there on gaming and entertainment. And he's widely published. His publications include a monograph called Empirical Views on European Gambling Law and Addiction. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. The title of this panel is probably something we ought to clarify a little bit at the outset, because it says shaping the future of player protection and a potential post-advertising ban in Northern Europe. And in reality, what this refers to is player protection in an environment which is now largely characterized in Europe by severe restrictions on advertising. In some jurisdictions, a complete ban. I think Italy probably led the way with that in 2019. And in the context of player protection, it's very relevant to ask, and I think I'll start off with David on this, whether there's any empirical evidence for severe restrictions on advertising or total bans having had an effect on the protection of vulnerable consumers. So have they served to really protect vulnerable consumers? I think that's one important question to ask ourselves. Is there any utility? And I think it's also relevant to ask ourselves, were these bans introduced based on any empirical evidence? So was there any evidence at the outset that these bans would work? And now ex post, have they worked?
Yeah, so I'll start maybe, can't start with the second question. Let's start with the first one on the what's happening right now. There are some research that would indicate that putting a ban or putting restriction on advertising doesn't necessarily deal with the problem of addictive gambling. From my experience, from what I've seen, is that if there is a player that is an addictive player, the effectiveness of the ban will not work. You would always look for those alternatives in different ways. The fact that there's somebody is promoting a game or promoting a service doesn't necessarily prevent him from doing so. Yes, it does create an environment where it's more flexible and easier for him to access those services, but it doesn't prevent him. And some research do suggest that it's not the most effective measures. As to what happened before that, I really can't answer the question. I think that what we've seen right now is that the biggest issue that we have is that the continuation of these restrictions. The continuation of these restrictions are actually encouraging more unregulated players or operators to penetrate the market, and you're actually achieving the opposite goal. And that is a fact. That is literally what's going on right now. And more importantly, the there's no legitimacy for our actually regulated operators for continuing to operate in the market because they're incapable of promoting their own services and therefore pushing them out.
Justin, you experienced this intimately because you followed the Dutch market regulation there and how this came about, and now ex post, right? What the impact has been of the regulation and what the trend is in terms of how advertising is dealt with, but also what sort of additional restrictions are being proposed.
Thank you, James. Yes, of course, we have the current market restrictions. We have the Orca decree, which prohibits untargeted advertising. That obviously had a massive effect. This was the sort of a countermeasure of government after the opening of the market. We saw in October 21, we saw massive TV campaigns which pissed off politicians, pissed off the general public, and there was a very quick reaction to that, which was the Orca decree. So we have some residual marketing left. You can still do some marketing, but then you need to demonstrate that your marketing outings reach, well, 95% should not target the vulnerable and young adults, which is obviously very complicated with, for instance, affiliate marketing. More recently, a report came out. I have this in front of me. This is a summary. It's 19 pages or 17 pages. The actual report is 200 pages. It's very boring reading, but the conclusions aren't great for the industry, just to put it mildly. Basically, the key conclusion here is that the Dutch government has been incredibly naive in giving a lot of, let's say, power to the operators. The duty of care is something the operators should take care of. And a lot of powers have been given to the consumers who can set their own deposit limits. That has now changed. As of recently, you may have seen that as of the 1st of October, we're confronted with net deposit limits of 700 euros per month for over 24s. For young adults, that would be 350 a month, which had a massive effect on all of the operators. A couple of things which are striking from this evaluation report. Basically what it says is that 70% of the Dutch player population was not playing in the previously unregulated environment. So 70% of the players are new. This obviously doesn't go down well politically, as you can imagine. Secondly, about 20% of the accounts held, there are 3 million player accounts in the Netherlands, about 20% of those player accounts are held by young adults, which only represent less than 10% of the Dutch population. And that group is supposed to be protected, specifically, I would say. What we're seeing, maybe as a summary of this, what we're seeing is that we're seeing a fundamental change in the thinking about gambling in the Netherlands, I believe. Whereas originally, the responsibility was given to the operators and to the players. We're now seeing a more of a, top-down approach where government is basically saying, we are going to tell the operators how they should take care of responsible gambling. We are going to tell them what kind of advertising they can and can't do.
So that seems to be really and truly in line with the trend we've seen in Europe. So the duty of care you spoke about, right? The notion that regulation would occur and there would be some restrictions, but by and large it would be left to the industry to sort of regulate or be measured. I think it's something which policymakers initially thought would work for them. There's a bigger emphasis on consumer protection and player protection, probably coming from a little bit of a shift, or a large shift in policy really, thinking of gambling more as a public health issue rather than as a entertainment industry which needs to have some regulation. But then the principal issue we're discussing, of course, is what are those measures, what are the measures which work, and does introducing severe restrictions on advertising and an advertising ban in some countries help to reduce problem gambling. Simon, you've done some research into this. Would you like to share that research with us, or share the conclusions of that research?
Yeah, so in order, first of all, to assess whether these bans are working, you would have to look at the situation before and after. And I'm not aware of studies in Europe that actually have done this recently. And from our own studies that we've done, meta studies looking into the empirical evidence, we have found that it seems to matter much more what the concrete messages are in advertising. So for instance, not to advertise towards young people in terms of distorted realities, suggesting that it's good to take shortcuts in life and this pays off. So the concrete messages seem to matter, but to assume that the volume of advertising would negatively impact is, to my understanding and knowledge, still an assumption and has not been evidenced, actually.
Simon, sticking with you, this seems to be predominantly a European direction of travel. I'm not aware of any other jurisdictions in the world which have introduced a total advertising ban. Of course, there are still some jurisdictions in the world which completely ban gambling, but that's an altogether different proposition. With your lawyer's hats on, right? Mm-hmm. Do you think that this is a fair restriction on commerce, or even perhaps stretching it to the level of freedom of expression, if you want? Could there be any legal grounds, you think? Would you like to speculate as to whether there would be legal grounds in any of the jurisdictions you're familiar with to challenge this level of intrusion, this level of ban, right, on the basis that it results in no material benefit to the target group which it's seeking to protect?
Yes, so first of all, I agree. It is a European phenomenon. We don't really see this in North America happening. We don't really see Asian regulators following suit. So one legitimate question would be, why does Europe do that? And other continents don't seem to see the necessity in following suit. Some explain it to the Christian heritage. I doubt it, because this is far-fetched as a pan-European explanation. I think it has to do with the fact that this industry has grown massively in Europe, and thereby became much more visible and then more prone to criticism also. At the same time, in most countries, it's not big enough in terms of GDP to actually be strongly represented in national parliament in terms of interest. So yes, it's big enough to be criticized, to be on the radar, but not big enough to have a strong voice in parliament. And obviously, an exception to that rule is Malta, where you can see the industry being in the two-digit range of GDP, and this obviously has an impact. And then coming to the legal question that you raised, I do see challenge possibilities on three levels. One is national law. So most national constitutions will protect economic freedom, commercial freedom, and similar rights. And when you restrict these freedoms, usually you have a proportionality test. So that's for national law. Then you would have EU law available, where clearly it would be a combination of fundamental freedoms, free movement of services, combined with the right to promote these legal services with advertising. Now, one of the answers of the Court of Justice of the EU I could already hear would be national member states enjoy a wide margin of appreciation. That would be part of the answer. And the third one is really Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which protects freedom of expression. And it's recognized in the case law that this covers also commercial speech. So what the court in Strasbourg would do, they would look at the specific case and balance the interests of the member state arguing, for instance, public health or consumer protection with the protected right. And one point, maybe very importantly, if the measure turns out to be not suitable, then you don't
Thank
even
you.
look into necessity.
Thank you. So, David, and perhaps Justin, you want to add on to this. So, if advertising bans, and you alluded to this earlier, David, are driving business to the black market, then what is the regulated industry doing in order to address this point with national regulators and policymakers? And perhaps you can start by answering this question, and then Justin can come in also on whether there's any tension on this between regulators and policymakers, politicians, in his experience.
Yeah. I wouldn't go as far as freedom of expression or freedom of speech, but focusing on the commercial aspect. We spoke about it before. You have an Italian license that costs you $7 million in order to penetrate the market. There's a complete ban on advertisement. That means that you have a store at the far end of the street, and you're incapable of promoting it. You're incapable of driving people to that store. Now, once you bring those people to that store, then you need to scrutinize and then figure out if these are proper clients, yes or not. But having a complete inability to driving people to your business just does not make it commercially viable. And there's a vacuum that is created when something is not commercially viable. And the vacuum that is created can only be filled by unregulated operation because they're not adhering to those bans. They're not, but there's one more very, very crucial element, is they're not adhering to any other regulatory restrictions like limitations or monitoring of players. So you're basically replacing one evil with a worser evil. So you said you want to empower operators to take their own decision to actually apply some reasoning with with the way that they're conducting a business. And you can scrutinize the operator, yes, on how they accept players, yes or not, but preventing them from having the sole and only tool to drive their traffic to the business is just pulling the rug under their own feet. And that, I think, is just like you're going to the far end of the spectrum, which, in my opinion, is a complete mistake.
Is there alignment in your experience, maybe specifically in the Netherlands, actually? Do you think the regulator and the policymakers are
No.
aligned on this?
No, there is not. It's actually quite interesting. You should differentiate between the position of the gambling authority, if it comes to marketing restrictions, and the overall perception of many politicians, certainly not all of them. But what you have to bear in mind is that the industry lost a lot of its credibility right after the market opening, as I just mentioned. So the extreme forms of marketing, the responsibilities that were given to the operators was abused by at least some. So the current political climate in the Netherlands is, how do I describe it, horrible, I guess. If you ask, I would say, especially the Christian politicians, what they think about advertising, they think it should be completely banned, period. If you ask the same question to the regulator, he's very, very clear and realistic about it. And actually, this echoes what David has been saying. You have to tell the world that you're there. And otherwise, players will simply leave to the black market. The regulator seems to properly understand that. So it's going to be interesting what is going to happen next, because by the end of this year, our State Secretary of Justice is going to respond to this evaluation report, and he will come up with an entirely new gaming policy. And I wouldn't be surprised, as just said, that we will see some fundamental changes happening to the gaming legislation.
So in summary, and to conclude, would it be fair to say, from your analysis, that gambling bans are ineffective economically because if they're driving business to the black market, they're reducing tax revenues from the state? They are arguably ineffective from a player protection point of view because if they're driving business to the black market, then there are no restrictions and there's no player protection there. But that in reality what is happening is that the industry is suffering from this perception that it is a public health matter and that therefore it should be boxed in a similar manner to, let's say, cigarettes, rather than consumed responsibly like alcohol. Would that be a fair way of summarizing things?
Yeah, I'm sorry, just a quick note. First of all, yes, that would be fair, but I think that what I would recommend is to try to avoid from extreme situation. Having a complete ban and having no scrutiny on advertisement is unnecessary from both perspectives. You need to have some sort of a balance of perspective that will balance the regulatory approach as well as the commercial approach, because if they don't meet in the middle, none of them will be happy, and it's just a recipe for disaster on both sides.
Thank you very much. Our time is up, and there's several people making very threatening gestures at me, which I think means stop here. I don't think they're threats of decapitation.
James, I'm one of those people that's getting onto the stage. Can we please have a round of applause for James and his panel?
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.